It's a new year, and it's a new season. It's time for us to be sowing. Hello and welcome back to the No Dig Norfolk Gardener. Now it's mid-January and we're starting a new feature off on our channel. You've probably seen the thumbnail where it says Sow With Us. And whenever you see that thumbnail pop up, you know that we are about to sow something. Now, I think this will be a pretty handy feature for people. A lot of the questions that we get down in the comments is, what are you sowing? When are you sowing? When are you going to be doing your succession sowing? So throughout this series and throughout the season, you'll be able to see by watching this particular episode. Whenever you see that thumbnail that says Sow With Us, it means we're going to be sowing something. What I would say is do bear in mind that we grow our vegetables in zone 9A. So there are particular times when we can get away with sowing our seeds. For those of you that grow in different zones and climates, you're going to have to adjust your sowing times. Or you can sow at the same time as us, but your plants will be that bit larger when you actually pop them out into your beds. So you could decide that if you see us sowing something and you live in a zone where your frost date is some 2 weeks later than ours, you might want to wait 2 weeks before you sow it. Whatever way, it's going to remind you that the sowing date for these seeds is coming up. One thing that we are really pleased to be doing this season is to be using various different peat-free composts. Now here in the UK, from this year, 2024, the manufacturers of any compost cannot now include peat. You may still be able to get some because garden centres and places where you buy your compost, they will probably still have a stock of it. But at some point, that's all going to be gone. And you're going to have to use something that is peat-free. We ourselves in the past have tried using peat-free. We wanted to go peat-free as soon as it came to our attention. But we haven't really had great results using that compost. So we've got 4 different composts that we shall be using over the coming months to sow our seeds into. And for the month of January, all the seeds that we're sowing will go into this compost, which is Fertile Fibre. It's a company that's based down in Herefordshire, and it's actually been the Which Best Buy for the last 2 years. So I'm thinking this should be quite good. You can see it clearly states it's peat-free, 100% organic, and it is Soil Association approved. So it's got a lot going for it. And over the coming months when we do our sowing, we will introduce you to the others that we have. As I say, we've got 4 of them, and we'll see how they go. Now, it's a good idea whenever you're doing any sowing to have everything organised. That way you can get on with things. You haven't got to stop, start. So we've got our compost. I've got some vermiculite. We actually like to put vermiculite over the top of any sowings that we make. It's a bit lighter and it helps keep the moisture in, and you don't get that hard crust over the top like you would with compost. It's not a given, you don't have to use that, we just choose to. You could just simply put compost over the top. So that's the modules that we're going to be sowing into. Clearly you need your seeds, and I've got the seeds here. So let's see what this is actually like.
this one is a coir based, isn't it?
I believe it is Mrs. W,
Yeah.
yes. Well, it's nice and light. And there's not too many lumps in it, so feels really quite nice.
Looks good.
Yes. Now, the first things we want to sow are our onions. So I'll just find those.
Probably right at the bottom, because I think they were the first ones I put on the pile.
We're going to be sowing Rheinsberger, which we actually grew last season, and that performed really well. Indeed, we still have these onions down in our store in the shed at the bottom of the garden, don't we?
We do, yeah.
And
Working our way through them though, but yeah.
they've been really, really good. And bearing in mind, we harvested our onions mid-July.
Yeah.
So they've been going for some time now and been providing us with nice onions to eat. And then the other one we're going to sow is Red Baron, our old favourite. It's the red onion of our choice. I've tried others over the years, but find that one to be the best keeper of a red onion. Red onions don't tend to keep quite as well as white. I'm going to be using these modules, and they have 40 cells in them. I'm just going to put some compost into the cells. I'm just going to put some indentations into the cells. The seed packet will tell you how deep they need to be. I don't ever do anything particularly precisely, as Mrs. W will tell you, all in a china shop. Now, a good indication of when you should be sowing your seeds, the seed company always do put them on the back, and in the main, if you stick to that, you'll be okay. Once you become more experienced and you've grown things for a little while, you'll start to think to yourself, okay, I need these to harvest at a certain point, and I can get away with this. Some people actually sow their onions on Boxing Day. We don't do that because, as I said earlier, I'm quite a lazy gardener. I don't like all the potting on. Once these are sown, they will remain in these cells until they go out into the garden. Now, a good time to sow your onions is actually February. We've learnt over the years, though, that if we sow now, we will get our harvest in mid-July. And then that frees up that piece of land for us to be able to grow something else. Now, if you're a regular follower of our channel, you'll know that we multi-sow our onions. And I'm aiming for 6 to 8 seeds per cell. And that way, we will end up with 4 to 5 onions in a clump. That won't be massive onions, but equally they won't be really small onions. Just put some vermiculite over the top. It only needs a light covering. And we'll leave that in that water bath there for the next 20-30 minutes until it's absorbed all the water it needs. Now, these will go down to the house once they've had a good drink of water, and they will go on to our heat mats. At this time of year, heat mats are quite useful actually, because they do give them some bottom heat, and onions need a certain temperature to germinate at. They're relatively inexpensive and certainly not very expensive to run.
We've had these for quite a few years, haven't we?
We have, yes. What I shall do, I shall leave a link in the description below to where we got these from, So if you also want to invest in some heat mats, and like I say, it's not a huge investment, they're not overly expensive, then you'll be able to find your way there.
So I'm sowing 2 varieties of cauliflower. They're both new varieties to us this year that Mr. W has chosen. This one here is an F1 cauliflower skipper. And I'm going to aim for 2 seeds per cell. So 2 in there. And I'm only doing 5 cells of each because we don't need a huge amount of these. So 5 cells of the skipper, put that ticket in there. And the other variety is another F1 variety called Boris. Same again, 2 seeds per cell. And we will be thinning these to the strongest seedling. I'm also sowing here some pak choy. These are an F1 variety and another new variety to us called Yushu. And I'm again aiming for 2 seeds per cell. Mr. W was saying that he saw these and they are presumably less likely to bolt. And as we have trouble with our pak choy bolting at times, we thought we'd give these a try. And these are a green pak choy, are they? Yeah, because we have been growing the red, haven't we?
Yeah, they are a green variety, but also you can grow them for most of the year.
Oh, okay, that's good then. So that's the pak choy and radish French breakfast, good old favourites. Going to multi-sow these more like the onions, aiming for approximately 4 to 5, 5 to 6, something like that in each cell. They're quite a nice size to be able to see how many you're doing, so that's good. 3. And these will all go down to the house to germinate. Not all of these will go onto a heat mat, but just it's a little bit too cold out in the polytunnel or the greenhouse for them to germinate at the moment. Put that in there.
Well, considering this is really our first season using the polytunnel, it's the 13th of January today,
13th of January, yes.
It's about 2 degrees outside. Yet we're in this polytunnel in our t-shirts, so...
We both came out with a jacket, but they've both been discarded.
Yeah.
So I'll just fill over again with the vermiculite, making sure it goes into the hole.
This pak choy and radish, they will go down to that house to germinate. They don't need to go on a heat mat. They will germinate fine with the warmth of our kitchen. Once they've germinated, they'll actually come back up here to the polytunnel where they'll grow on. But it's important to remember that we're sowing these now because when it comes time to plant them out, they will be put into either this polytunnel or into our greenhouse. Here in Norfolk at least, it's still far too early to be putting anything like this into our outside beds. The soil temperature will remain very low until mid to late March. To finish our sowing off, I'm sowing some spring onions. And again, just like the radish and the pak choy, still too early to put these out. These will be grown undercover, either in our greenhouse or in the polytunnel. And with the spring onions, I'm aiming for more like 8 to 10 seeds per cell. I can hear the local tune going on, Mrs.
You
W.
can, can't you? Yeah.
And you can either take the largest ones from each bunch when they become ready, or if they look a good size, you've actually got your bunch of onions ready to eat with your salads. Now, that first variety was a variety called Guardsman, and the second variety I'm actually going to sow is a variety called Ramrod. Guardsman we'd grown for some time. Ramrod was new to us last year, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And it produces a very upright, straight onion. I quite like them when they're like that. And that's our first sowings of the new growing season. And they've all been sown with fertile fibre, compost. It's important that I think that we're not being paid any money for these composts that we're using. We're actually using these different composts just to see how they work. Do they work well? And then you can follow us along as these germinate, and then we eventually go to plant them out into the ground. If they perform well and it's something that you think has worked really well, then that will give you something to think about whether you think that that might be a good product to use. Now do let us know what you're sowing in January. I'll put a poll out there, so a lot of you have actually told me what you've been sowing, and it's really interesting. Around about 70% of you have actually sown some seeds already in January. Obviously 30% of you have not. But what I would say is, if you haven't sown anything yet, or you're new to gardening, you haven't done anything yet, don't stress about it. It really doesn't matter. If you look on the back of most seed packets, I can sow this anywhere between January and April. So there's quite a long window as to when you can actually sow most of these seeds. So don't forget, whenever you see that thumbnail, Sow With Us, it means that we're sowing something, and it will alert you to what can be sown at that time. Do have a great gardening week, and we shall see you on the next one.